for the taste is between the rest, because they are the best.
This is a download from BBC Learning English. To find out more, visit our website.
6 Minute English
From bbclearningenglish.com.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm Finn.
And I'm Neil. Hello. Today we're talking about Shakespeare.
Oh yes, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind...
Okay, thank you very much, Finn. But what does that famous Shakespeare line actually mean, Finn?
Yeah, well, it's quite hard to explain, actually. The English in Shakespeare's work is quite difficult.
Well, a Shakespeare festival in Oregon, in the United States, wants to change all of that. They want to pay writers, they want to commission what they call translations of Shakespeare's plays. Now, we usually use the word translation, of course, to talk about changing words and sentences from one language to another. But these writers have been commissioned to translate Shakespearean English into plain English.
So Shakespeare in easy, plain English. You know, I'm not sure I really like that idea.
Well, you're not the only one, Finn. We will talk about that in a moment, but first, as usual, we have our quiz question, and it's about Shakespeare and translation. What was the first language that Shakespeare's plays were translated into? Was it A, French, B, German, or C, Portuguese? What do you think?
You know, I really have no idea on this one. I'm going to say B, German.
We'll see if you're right at the end of the programme. But now we're going to hear from two Shakespeare experts speaking to the BBC. First, Andrew Dickinson. He's the author of Worlds Elsewhere, Journeys Around Shakespeare's Globe.
In his travels around the world, around the globe, did he find many translations of Shakespeare?
Someone's translated Hamlet into Klingon. He exists in all of these different places and all of these different forms. And I suppose that what really struck me when I was working on my book and travelling around the world talking to people about Shakespeare is that he's so multifarious. He exists in all of these places, and it feels sometimes that we in the English-speaking world are only just catching up with this.
Shakespeare expert Andrew Dickinson, who has travelled the world for his new book and knows about many translations, even one from out of this world.
Yes, he says someone has even translated Hamlet into Klingon. Now, that's the language spoken by aliens in Star Trek, which is, of course, a science fiction TV series, is not a real language.
Now, let's get back to the real world, Neil. Andrew Dickinson says that what really impressed him, what really struck him while working on his new book and travelling around the world talking about Shakespeare, is that Shakespeare is so multifarious. Multifarious, that's quite a difficult word.
Yes, it is. Well, in plain English, it means that there are many different types. There are many different translations, many different kinds of Shakespeare.
He's multifarious.
Finn, we're using plain English in this programme, like the people in Oregon who want to translate Shakespeare into plain English. That will make his plays easier to understand.
And that's a good thing. But there has also been strong criticism about this from academics who study Shakespeare, as well as from people on social media, on Facebook and Twitter. They think it's a bad idea.
Our next Shakespeare expert is Greg Doran. He's the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He's done productions outside Britain. Where did he do a production of the Shakespeare play Merchant of Venice? Here he's talking about the difficulty of translation.
I think the difficulty with a translation is that it simply translates the sense, and there's a lot more going on in the language of Shakespeare's plays. I remember once doing a production of Merchant of Venice in Japan, and I was asked, we were having a new translation done, and I was asked if I wanted the translation for meaning, for pace, or for poetry. And that's the difficulty. You've got to find all three somehow together.
Greg Doran, artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. He was doing a Shakespeare production in Japan. He says that the difficulty with translation is that it only translates the sense. It's only the general meaning. but he says that there's more than that.
Yes, they were having a translation done, and he was asked if he wanted the translation for meaning or for pace. Now that's about the speed of the lines in the play, or was the poetry of the words important?
And his answer was that you've got to find all three somehow together. It's not just one thing.
He says that there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening in the language of Shakespeare's plays.
And so a simple translation of the words into plain English isn't really Shakespeare. And I think it's time to answer our quiz question.
Yes, if you remember, it's about translations of Shakespeare. What was the first language that Shakespeare's plays were translated into? Was it A, French, B, German, C, Portuguese?
I said B, German, which I'll admit was a guess.
And that is the right answer.
Fantastic.
Apparently, Shakespeare's plays were translated into German as early as the first decade of the 17th century. And that's all for now. Please do join us again for 6 Minute English.
To be or not to be.
Yes, okay, thanks, Finn.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
6 Minute English from the BBC.
А вот это варенье, она удачнее, вот это варенье. My photo taste is the Pinterest. Because they are the best. Flick to link, a link to flick.
And what we're here to do is not to talk about Puerto Rico or the past. We're here to do is to see if we can figure out a way to stop the suffering and the bloodshed in Chechnya. The conversation got back on track. That's the role of the third side, is to help the parties go to the balcony.
It seems to me like a big source of conflict is human ego. Is that fair?
It is fair. Human ego is basically defensiveness against being threatened.
But this is the crazy thing about our human species. That peace is harder than war. That we have evolved to a place, or maybe we were always like this, maybe it's just wired into us, that war and fighting is just easier. It's just an easier default than actually resolving something.
It is. It's true. Peace is harder than war, and the fact that we're still all alive here is because our ancestors got good at this, because we have this birthright of the third side, of the community coming in and saying, we can find a way through this. And I mean, human beings, we're hardwired for cooperation. That's why we have language. That's how we're able to speak, is because we learn to cooperate in order to deal with our differences. So yes, it's hard, but we're also given the tools of being able to communicate with each other, of being able to listen to each other, that allow us to work through these differences.
You know, Bill, when I'm looking around at what's happening after the election in the U.S., or it's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. So, how's everyone doing this week? Should we just eat?
Well, we're very good on roots, so we can do potatoes and root crops and carrots and rhubarb, the salad crops, the beetroots and the onions and the leeks and all manner of things.
This is Pam Warhurst, by the way.
I'm a mum that comes from Todmorden, which is a small town in West Yorkshire.
Todmorden
is
in the north of England.
Todmorden.
And it turns out it's one of the best places to be.
We're great on soft fruit.
Just a little bit hungry.
So we're great on raspberries and black currants and white currants and loganberries and strawberries and all sorts of other crops, herbs and kale and you name it. Beans, we do a load of beans, edible flowers and all sorts of things. We're pretty good for apples. And pears. We can even grow melons and aubergines. So yeah, there's no shortage of great things.
All that stuff grows in cold, grey, and rainy Todmorden. And when we say in Todmorden, well,
you walk down the middle of the town, you come along a canal, there's food growing on either side. all the time to share. It's public food to share. You walk to our police station and there's maize growing in the front of our police station.
Corn in front of the station, wow.
Absolutely, in raised beds. In private gardens, people are growing a heck of a lot in front of our college. We've got it at the railway station. We've got it in the park. We've got it along grass verges. We've surrounded our health centre with edibles.
So if I'm walking through Todmorden and I just like, I don't know, see like a bell pepper growing and just pick it up and start eating it, nobody's gonna say, hey, what are you doing? That's my bell pepper.
No, of course they're not. No, they're not. But the really interesting thing is it helps throw back some attitudes about individuals' behaviour, because as I say, we've got them at the railway station and all over the place, and we've got big signs that say food to share.
Wow.
If you want to pick rocket, or you want to pick tomatoes, or you want to pick a pepper, or whatever's there, it's yours to pick. And the truth is, nobody picks everything. They pick enough, and that's it.
Todmorden has been like this for a decade or so. Ever since Pam started a movement there to bring the community together around food. And that is how her movement, Incredible Edible, was born. The idea for it came to her on a train ride one afternoon when she was coming back from an environmental conference.
I had no intentions of doing anything different on that day. I just sat in the audience and listened. And it just suddenly struck me. Why don't I just go home and start to do things differently? I got on a train and I just made up Incredible Edible. And it was a really simple model, really simple. It was just, let's imagine in wherever we live, in our borough, our neighbourhood, our town, our village, whatever, it works at any scale. We planted edible landscapes everywhere that we could.
You just could like empty lots and just start planting stuff.
Plant food.
Right.
And then we've got pictures up that show people what's growing there. Sometimes we asked permission. More often than not, we might not.
So if you just walk through Todmorden in the summertime, you're going to just see fruits and vegetables growing everywhere.
Yeah, you absolutely are. But, you know, I often say, this isn't Kew Gardens, you know. Yeah. It's not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. But we do our flipping best.
Here's how Pam explained it on the TED stage.
Now, none of this is rocket science. It certainly is not clever, and it's not original. But it is joined up, and it is inclusive. This is not a movement for those people that are going to sort themselves out anyway. This is a movement for everyone. We have a motto: if you eat, you're in. Across age, across income, across culture. Is it replicable? Yeah. It most certainly is replicable. More than 30 towns in England now. Whichever way they want to do it, they're of their own volition, they're trying to make their own lives differently. And worldwide, we've got communities across America and Japan. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, America and Japan and New Zealand. People, after the earthquake in New Zealand, visited us in order to incorporate some of this public spiritedness around local growing into the heart of Christchurch. We've even invented a new form of tourism. It's called vegetable tourism. And believe it or not, people come from all over the world to poke around in our raised beds, even when there's not much growing. But it starts a conversation. And you know, we're not doing it because we're bored. We're doing it because we want to start a revolution. We try to answer this simple question: can you find a unifying language that cuts across age and income and culture that will help people themselves find a new way of living? See spaces around them differently, think about the resource they use differently, interact differently. And the answer would appear to be yes, and the language would appear to be food.
Most of us just go to the supermarket, pick up a plastic bag of lettuce or a shrink-wrapped styrofoam tray of meat, and get on home to make dinner. But we don't always think about how that food got there, or how certain forces shaped the choices we make in the supermarket. So today on the show, ideas about how we connect with food, why we eat certain things and not others, and what the future of food may look, or rather taste like. One thing Pam Warhurst showed in Todmorden was how food could spark a change in every part of people's lives.
Plant food, tell people what's there,
right.
Go on Facebook, ask them, help themselves. And that starts to reshape the look of the town. And then the next bit, so that's the first step, this next bit is, let's show people how to cook, let's show people how to grow, let's show people what's in season. And then let's talk to some of our older citizens who know how to do all that, but nobody's bothering asking them. Because if you grow up seeing food all over the place and start to connect with it, and if you know what to do with it, you are more likely to think about, if you can, supporting your local markets, your local farmers, your local, food businesses, rather than, without thinking and not meaning any harm, nip into the supermarket and buying something in a plastic bag that's flown all over the world.
But I'm curious, because, to be able to do this in Todmorden, I mean, the north of England does not have, the greatest farmland in the world, right?
Well, it's mixed. No, it's very marginal. It's absolutely marginal, but we just talk about food to get people talking, because actually there'll be decreasing amounts of land in many parts of the world that we can grow our food on, but we still need to feed ourselves. So we need to think about, can we grow on rooftops? Well, of course we can. Can we grow up the sides of buildings? Well, of course we can. And what I think that's happened over the last 9 years, if people have suddenly opened their eyes to space and seen their environments in a completely different way and thought, hey, I could grow food on that. And it's fantastic. So even in the north of England, we can change the way we live by thinking about where we grow things, how we grow things, and how we share things.
I'm totally moving to Todmorden in the summer.
Yeah, well, it's great.
Pat Moorhurst, that movement she started in Todmorden and now in towns all around the world is called Incredible Edible. You can learn more about it in Pam's full TED Talk. That's at TED.com. Okay, so fruits and vegetables in every corner in Todmorden, that's real food, right? But the problem is that in most modern supermarkets, especially in America, that is not what we eat.
It sort of depends how you define things, but I would say a minimum of 40% of the stuff in American supermarkets wouldn't really qualify as food by the dictionary definition.
Wait, 40% wouldn't qualify as food?
Well, if you think of food, the definition of food is something that sustains and nourishes. And the definition of nourishment is something that increases your health. So if something is not increasing your health but making you ill, it doesn't really meet the dictionary definition of food.
This is food writer and cookbook author Mark Bittman. His most famous cookbook, actually one of the best-selling of all time, is simply called How to Cook Everything. Do people hug you in airports?
It's happened. Not often, but yeah, it's happened.
Anyway, Mark says that most of what we eat today isn't real food, but it wasn't always like that. Here's Mark Bittman on the TED stage.
100 years ago, guess what? Everyone was a locavore. Every family had a cook, usually a mom, and those moms bought and prepared food. It was like your romantic vision of Europe. There was no snack food, and until the 20s, until Clarence Birdseye came along, there was no frozen food. Margarine didn't exist. In fact, when margarine was invented, several states passed laws declaring that it had to be dyed pink, so we'd all know that it was a fake. There were no restaurant chains. Eating ethnic was unheard of unless you were ethnic. Back in those days, there was no philosophy of food. You just ate. You didn't claim to be anything. Fats, carbs, proteins, they weren't bad or good. They were food. You ate food. Hardly anything contained more than one ingredient because it was an ingredient. The cornflake hadn't been invented. The Pop-Tart, the Pringle, Cheese Whiz, none of that stuff. Goldfish swam. And again, everyone ate local. In New York, an orange was a common Christmas present because it came all the way from Florida. From the 30s on, road systems expanded, trucks took the place of railroads, fresh food began to travel more, oranges became common in New York. The South and West became agricultural hubs, and in other parts of the country, suburbs took over farmland. The effects of this are well known, they're everywhere, and the death of family farms is part of this puzzle, as is almost everything. From the demise of the real community to the challenge of finding a good tomato even in summer.
Flick to link, link to flick. My photo taste is the bit in the rest. Because they are the best.
This is a download from BBC Learning English. To find out more, visit our website.
6 Minute English from bbclearningenglish.com.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm Finn.
And I'm Neil. Hello. Today we're talking about Shakespeare.
Oh yes, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind...
Okay, thank you very much, Finn. But what does that famous Shakespeare line actually mean, Finn?
Yeah, well, it's quite hard to explain, actually. The English in Shakespeare's work is quite difficult.
Well, a Shakespeare festival in Oregon, in the United States, wants to change all of that. They want to pay writers, they want to commission what they call translations of Shakespeare's plays. Now, we usually use the word translation, of course, to talk about changing words and sentences from one language to another. But these writers have been commissioned to translate Shakespearean